Hello and welcome back. It's day 2060 or 5.64 years of this Growing Joshua Trees from Seed series. I started counting past the 3-year or 1,000-day mark. So I lived at this condominium for 1 year. It doesn't get any sun 4.5 months out of 12 due to the mostly southern facing balcony with a serious overhang that blocks out a lot of light as well. So in the previous episode, I mused that this might be a new shoot because that's what you see in nature a lot. But now I'm starting to think, maybe that's not a new shoot. It seems too soft. So it's day 2095. I continue my occasional fertilization, which was infrequent back then. It's basically one small end scoop of the Miracle-Gro all-purpose plant food coupled with a little bit of crushed vitamin powder, which was the white stuff, and then I just water on top until it's full to the lip twice and let it go down. So it's day 2124, and as you can see, this is clearly not a Joshua tree seedling or an offshoot rather. It's just some kind of wild grass. So I was quite embarrassed when it developed like this, and I know there's this strobing effect from that headlight, and yeah, just a few days later it developed more, so there was no point in keeping this, but I just wanted to let it go for a little bit to see if anything would develop that was interesting, but it's sort of this heavily blade overlapping sort of grass with 2 tap roots apparently. So mildly interesting, but I'm just going to pull out any weeds that will siphon off water and nutrients from my Joshua tree. And I had a lot of fun with this backpack sprayer, as I've mentioned in the other series. This is in my new apartment afterwards with a large long balcony. It's day 2229. You can see the coloration of the Joshua tree blades is beautiful. It's a very verdant green. So the problem with this place, and I was only here for 8 months, was that the balcony was infested, or the apartment rather, too, with spiders, all of the same species, sort of a reddish brown, not too big, and they would just spin webs on everything. It's really annoying, and there were snails coming in from the ground floor. There's a lot of detritus falling from these trees due to the canopy. So that just kind of happened over and over again. It was just really unpleasant to deal with, very messy. And this is a very old apartment complex, and there's pines and giant Peruvian pepper trees just shedding all these leaves and fruits and cones and pine needles onto my balcony. So if I didn't go onto the balcony for every 2 or 3 weeks and do a thorough vacuuming or sweeping, everything would just get overwhelmed with webs and filth. So it's day 2239, fertilizing again. Fertilizations are very infrequent because this thing is a very slow grower, so I didn't feel the need to keep doing it. This is day 2302. You could see all these webs and pine needles jammed in there, which really annoys me because I've had to look at this every day for the better part of this 8 months, and yeah, it was very unpleasant because in all of my other places, the Joshua tree was very clean and didn't have a single or nary a single web on it. So I just don't like my plants being covered in filth all the time. And this is not something you would see in nature either. This balcony was infested. And I tried using a pesticide that targets spiders, and it seemed to work indoors. But outdoors, I think due to the weathering effects and a lot of pesticides are just not that potent compared to the decades past, and they get weaker each decade because we discover that they're poisoning bees and other things. So you can't use this class of compounds, you can't use that class of compounds. For general bug and pest control, more insect control, I talked about pyrethrins or pyrethrin analogs in the past, in years past, and nowadays you can't even use those either. So a lot of options are off the table. It seems like pesticides in general, they don't hold insects off outside for more than a few days at most. So it's day 2459. That's 3 moves in the span of 1 video. I'm in a townhouse now. This is the very beginning of 2022. This front yard is a hot, dry environment with full sunlight and concrete slabs. So you can imagine it takes a bit of acclimatizing. And the reason why these are all bent, these old spent blades or leaves, if you want to call them, is because I wrapped everything in dual layers of trash bags to move them over. So this is a very hard plant to move, and the clay and sand mixture is very, very heavy. So I inadvertently will poke myself once or twice when I'm trying to move this plant. So it's a very tough experience to move succulents like this. So yeah, I'm trimming these off for aesthetic reasons. Obviously, I don't want all these downwards dried up blades with this bent angle in the middle. It just looks really unsightly. So I haven't trimmed for quite a while, but it seems like this move itself, it triggered a few of these blades, these leaves to wither off. So I think this thing might not, it might have maybe a little bit of a negative effect from all of this direct sunlight. It's never experienced full sunlight in its entire life. So for the better part of 7 years, it's never had any exposure to direct sunlight. So this is not on a flat, it's not a flat area either. So it doesn't get maybe, I don't know, the 14 hours or even 16 hours on some days of sunlight that this would on the high plains or the plateaus, 4,000 feet up, 2,000 feet up, in places like Joshua Tree National Park. So this is not getting as much full sun as those places, but it's getting close to it now. There is a little ramp nearby with really tall bushes that prevents sort of light getting in from the very early hours of the morning. And also there's a roof on one side, so that prevents some light from hitting these plants as well, but it's basically full sunlight. And these concrete slabs are, I imagine they get quite hot during the day and radiate a lot of heat off of them. And that applies during the nighttime too, even when the sun's gone down. So it's day 2535. Doing some more trimming, although it's just one blade at this point. So that's not too bad. It stopped losing blades, and all the other plants, as you can see in the background, they basically melted or just withered away. All of the leaves mostly just died within the first few days of moving here upon exposure to direct sun. So I got some weeds here. This sand and soil, clay soil mixture, this one was about, I believe it was like 25% clay soil, filtered clay soil, 75% sand, something like that, if I'm not mistaken. It could be something higher actually in terms of clay soil. But I'm going to stick with that for now. I just think that this doesn't seem very breathable, but at the same time, when you dig around like this, at least it's not like a mud brick, a sun-dried mud brick that pure clay would be from this area. So I would think the drainage is excellent, but I don't know if the root system is truly happy in this mixture, because it didn't seem to be working from all my other plants. And as you can see, I already transplanted them into these other pots with Coco coir. So yeah, I was applying this new all-in-one pesticide, fungicide that I got. It's made by Bayer Bio-Advanced. And I started fertilizing every 2 weeks, the more traditional way according to the instructions, which is 1 large scoop of Miracle-Gro all-purpose plant food, and 2 crushed vitamins in this watering pail, which holds about 1.75 gallons. It's about 7 liters, 16 pounds of fluid inside. So I do that every 2 weeks. Snail problem here is actually worse than the last place, and I think this one was just living in the tray. I'm not sure if this snail or snails in general or slugs can damage my Joshua tree. Maybe they were, if they were living in the tray, can eat the roots. It definitely can't eat those leaves because they're way too tough, but they're eating the leaves of all my other plants. So I transplanted and started 3 new series for these 5 other plants in Coco coir, and you can't really tell from this very obviously, but they really took off afterwards, as you might see in the background in later footage of this video. And I scattered a lot of these iron phosphate pellets around. These are basically eco-safe. They're harmless against humans. Mammals, reptiles, and birds don't suffer any effects from eating this compound. It's a very basic compound that's actually within us, and it doesn't do anything to us. But for some reason, when you put pellets of this outside, snails and slugs run over and eat them. And then, for unknown mechanisms, they just sort of sit there after they gorge themselves on these things and don't do anything. They stop eating and moving for several days, and then they basically croak. So they blacken as well. So it's day 2584. You can see there's a snail right there in the middle. I just wanted to show that with this clip. And there's still a lot of webs here. I imagine I bought a lot of spiders over from my last apartment that I was at for only 8 months. That place was totally infested, but at the same time I can't see any spiders. But I see all these webs, and I don't think these are spider mites either. And I've been spraying that 3-in-1 miticide from Bayer Advanced. So I don't know what's the deal with all those webs. So it's day 2668. It's 7.3 years. This is basically the time of release for this episode. Well, the time in which I did all of my work on this last day of filming. So this is the biggest pot I've ever bought. It's 10 gallons, and basically that's, what is that? 3.78 times 10, yes, 37.8 liters. So I don't know if that volume includes going all the way up to the rim or not, but the place where my hand's grabbing, it's actually hollow under that lip inside, and it's got a tag like an article of clothing from a department store. So basically, the only thing you need to do is drill these holes after you cut out the tag. And as you saw on the bottom, there's like 2 ducts on the side. You can also see here for the air to get in. And yeah, it takes a while, but just use a power drill and drill as many holes as you can. So this might not have as good of a drainage and aeration as the pot it's in currently, but they don't sell really tough pots like that anymore. With the self-watering trays, they're basically, they've moved on to all these crappier pots that I don't like. So I'm going with this really big one. I hope by drilling in dozens and dozens of like large holes in the bottom that it'll get enough aeration. That's the most important thing for the root system, because a root system of a plant, it needs to breathe in oxygen. You know, it carries out respiration just like we do. It doesn't need any carbon dioxide, so you need roots that can breathe to develop well. And to do that, there needs to be conduits for air to get in. And the theory is that in the wild, a lot of tree roots are limited, or bush roots, by how much oxygen is present in the soil. So for some species, they just won't go very deep. But there are others where the roots just go insanely deep for water. So I don't know how those roots cope with the lack of oxygen like deep down underground, because no matter what soil type you have, it's all going to be the same problem, even if it's mostly sand instead of pure clay. So yeah, I'm drilling all these holes. I tried using different drill bits, and actually the trouble here is actually just plucking out all of these hard little scraps of plastic and getting a vacuum cleaner and getting rid of all this. But this is a very tough pot actually. It's a thicker plastic. It's sort of a resin, thicker plastic than any of the other pots I've had, which makes total sense because it's going to house 10 gallons of soil and all that root mass and weight from the shoot systems above. So it's got to be a very tough pot. Alright, so now I'm going to go over all the prep work I did for this upcoming transplant. Here you can see me preheating the oven to 250 Fahrenheit. That's 121 Celsius, well above boiling point. and I'm doing this just to be on the safe side to sterilize my Coco coir, which I'll show you in a minute. So this is a medium that shouldn't contain bugs or pests according to the manufacturer, but there is a tiny minority of Amazon reviewers that said they grew this, used this to grow plants and had bugs. So you can never be too safe. This is my first time using Coco coir. Some of my users suggested this a decade ago, and I never listened back then, but I'm always considering new ideas, and since the whole sand and clay soil, filtered clay soil mixture hasn't been working out that well in those double stacked Rubbermaid trash cans with drilled holes, I've decided to go with this because I don't want to drag around hundreds of pounds of sand and clay anymore. So just for the convenience factor, I'm going to go with this. So there's a brick, and you add 25 liters, 6.6 gallons of water, and you should get 55 liters or almost 15 gallons of puffed up hydrated coco coir. So this is what it looks like shrink wrapped, and you can see there's already some holes in it. So it's very dry, and if this package were to get water seeping in, then it would bust open, kind of like those mattresses that inflate out of the box upon exposure to air. So I've seen a lot of videos of this, and I've done some research online, and basically this thing expands like crazy when it comes into contact with water. So I'm going to bake my brick. So that weighs 5 kilos or 11 pounds. It's not too heavy, and it basically turns into this huge volume afterwards. So after 2 hours of baking, the brick cracked, but it didn't burn or give off any smells. So there were no smells before, and there are no smells during or after. So this bake surely killed any parasites that may have been present. Alright, so I got this beautiful tote box. It has 2 clamps on the sides for $16 from Target. It's a really good deal for a tote box. It's not too expensive, and it's the perfect volume and shape for hydrating a big brick of coco coir like I just showed you in my other plant series in 2022. I used the bottom end of a trash can, a 13-gallon trash can I believe, to do the hydration, and due to the shape of the brick and how it expands, it basically gets stuck at the bottom and warps the can, and it takes so much effort to use a trowel to try to knock all of that and scrape all of that out, especially since the stuff at the bottom, it's just all squished against each other, and not all of it is totally wet. You have to sort of use your gloves and hands and mix it around like this to get it into a uniform mixture that's well hydrated. So I'm going to start by scraping off the dead weeds that are now unrecognizable, and the small modest amounts of this 75% sand, 25% filtered clay soil mixture on the top. You can see little bits of roots are already breaking off. It's not a good sign. It sort of points to poor root health. So I'm not too sure how good this sand soil mixture is. It's the end of an era for this channel in terms of using this natural sand and soil mixture. I thought it would be the best thing for the plants, and certainly it cost a lot of labor. It's a labor of love, and I dragged hundreds of pounds of basically sand and clay soil. So the sand all came from Lowe's and came in bags because it's just cheaper that way and easier, much, much easier than driving out in the wild to try to procure sand. But the clay soil, that took a lot of effort. So I was very loath to abandon this system, this growing medium, but this is what it's come down to. It's not very good for my plants. So although the theory all sounded very correct for all that stuff that I got from that third generation grower Gary from I think it was like Laguna Hills Nursery, something like that. He has a YouTube channel and it has all of these great videos. But yeah, he goes into the theory of how plant roots need to breathe. And one thing you can do is just grow them in pure sand. And in my choice, I decided to mix in some clay soil a few years ago. And I thought that would be great for my plants. But even in a pot that gets this much aeration, I sort of have my doubts. I mean, this looks relatively healthy. And you can see it's got all these beautiful roots that sort of resemble the mango roots of my honey mango series, or even the other mango seedling series where I just germinate indoors or in a plastic bottle. It looks really pretty, the coloration, but the ones on the outside are sort of like waterlogged and rotten looking. And I think when I was rocking around, I heard some breaking noises. And I know the angles are all unnatural and unsightly due to the shape of the pot, but I'm thinking, it's partially to do with the pot. I did maybe overwater a lot, but at the same time, with all this drainage and aeration from the slits in the bottom in the watering tray, I figured that this shouldn't have any problems. So I'm really excited to try this Coco coir growing medium out and see how that works. So you can see there's still some root growth here. There's roots that are white or pale. Those are the growing ones, and there's the red mature ones, which are really beautiful. And then you've got some growth on this little like dangler to the side that's sort of encircling the pot. And the ones that are sort of like dark brown, and those are probably the ones that were cracking. So you can see this tree doesn't have a very robust root system, and that's partly because I waited so long to do this transplant. So I'm hoping to really give this thing a boost over the next few years. Now it's getting full sun, and now it'll have plenty of growing medium compared to all my other plants to sort of develop a really good root system. So I can sort of imagine if this thing has brittle roots, and I'm not just sure that's because of my growing conditions, then maybe it's true what they say in Joshua Tree National Park on the website and Facebook and other resources, where they say don't hang your hammock between Joshua trees and sleep on it because you're going to pull the trees over. So if the trees do have a fragile root system, then this could be why. So maybe it's just something that it can't take a lot of torque. It can't take a lot of sideways force on the trunk. So as you just saw, there's a lot of new little roots growing out from the bottom center that sort of look like instant noodles, dry ones. So I already have a bunch of coco coir in the bottom that's hydrated. I definitely wouldn't recommend putting just directly bone dry coco coir into the bottom, or just like doing a transplant into that, because I think it would just suck all the water out of the roots and perhaps even kill your plant just in that short amount of time that it takes to transplant. So I'd avoid that. And yeah, it's just a process of holding this trunk as best as you can in the middle. This has a nice thick trunk to grab onto after 7.3 years. For a lot of smaller plants, it's tougher. But there's a tendency for the plant or the entire root system to sort of sink down, which is not really a problem with a pot this big and deep, because it can sink a little bit and I can just adjust the soil level for the positioning. But I'd rather have it to where I want it to be, which is the inner lip that's hollow for this pot be like a kind of a guidance level for where the base of the trunk should be. I don't want the base of the trunk to be too deep into this thing. So this is a pretty easy transplant. It was nice to get the garden hose and wash off all of the mud, basically the clay and sand from the root system, and get a very clear look. So this is probably the only video series in the world where you'll get like a really good look at Joshua Tree roots. And you're never going to see stuff like this in the wild unless you were to dig up an entire tree, which is probably illegal anyway. So yeah, it's coming out very nicely, and you can adjust coco coir so easily. That's another thing I really love about this growing medium, is you can compact it. You won't hear the root snapping or crunching, and you can spin the pot around, look at the angle, and make sure the trunk and the shoot system is perpendicular with everything. It's perpendicular to the ground, and basically add the finishing touches like I'm doing here. You don't need to hold on to it. This material is very springy, so it basically holds everything together in place, even if they're shifting around of the pot. And as you'll see, as I move around the pot, it sort of has a springy action back and forth, which it won't have in really heavy sand and clay soil. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't make this thing go off kilter. It's not like potting mix either. So it just holds the position of everything and holds water really, really well. Downside is all the prep work. You don't have to bake it in an oven if you don't want to. I just did that as a precaution, but it can be a little expensive because this pot, as you can see here, this is like, I don't know, $32. Maybe there was tax after that too, so maybe you're looking at 35. And then that Coco coir brick, I used maybe 2/3 of that to fill this 10-gallon pot. So that's another, let's see, that's another 20 something dollars. Maybe that's $60 total just to get this transplant done. I have all this Coco coir left over, but it's basically not cheap compared to all the endeavors I've done in the past. So these other trees are growing really fast, and I'm wondering if I should do this kind of a transplant too for those. So thanks for watching, and please stay tuned for further updates to this series.